Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Brian. This is my 2008 VW GTI. It has the 2.0 FSI turbo engine in it, which is also a BPY engine code. I purchased this car new and it has 209,000 miles on it right now, so it's in the garage for some kind of much needed maintenance. So we just replaced the oil filter housing, which had a pretty massive oil leak. Got that straightened up, and while we had the oil pan off, kind of searching for the oil leak, noticed some bits and pieces of plastic in the oil pan. Thought maybe they came from the dipstick tube, but they're not quite the right color. So what I believe it's to be is back behind here, there's actually a cam chain that connects the two chains together. So in here, under the engine cover, so this engine actually has a belt-driven camshaft on this end. And on this end, the two cam chains are tied together with the chain. So I believe that the problem is the bits and pieces we found in the oil pan are the tensioner for that chain. And also it's kind of noisy on this end. I guess I could have let it run and let you hear that. But so the pieces I found in the oil pan, I'm assuming, are the tensioner kind of ramps that hold the tension on the chain. So apparently it's a pretty common problem in these cars. So I've purchased all the pieces to replace that tensioner, the chain, valve cover, gaskets, all the gaskets. I should need PCV, all that. Let's get started. I'm going to remove the battery just to give more access to this end of the engine. I suppose it's not entirely necessary. Go ahead and pull this tray out too. So that frees up plenty of room here. Next up, I suppose we'll go ahead and pull the coil packs out. Most of these clips are already broken, so they should unplug pretty easily. And the screws that hold the wire loom are also gone. Can you tell which one's not like the other? These hoses attach to the valve cover. Theoretically, you can squeeze the clamp and they'll pull off. And there's this new one here, which I just put in. Next up, I suppose we can take the high pressure fuel pump off. So there's an electrical connector there, which that's already broken, so that's easy enough. So there are fuel connections under here that'll need to come loose. And I believe these Torx fittings take it off. Looks like this fuel pressure test port going to have to come out to get to that bolt. And so grab this while we're here. another one here. And they're captured by this coolant hose. So this is the high pressure fuel pump, this is the vacuum pump. It's apparently also a source of oil leaks, so I'm going to rebuild that while we're here. So I figured I'd unhook it. So that hose connection comes right off. That fitting's had it, so something's broken here. So it's probably part of the oil leak or a vacuum leak, so I'll probably go ahead and replace that while we're at it. So this should be a fuel pressure test port. It should have a Schrader valve in it. So if there's any residual fuel pressure, let's go ahead and let that out. As I said, pretty sure that's going to have to come out anyway. Below this, it's a hard fuel line, and probably the return, well, probably the supply line and the return, the high pressure line coming out the metal one. That is a 17 millimeter. This fitting's a 13. These look to be T30s. There's a return line. For right now, we're just going to leave that here. And then this is the follower or lifter for said high pressure fuel pump. So that thing should not have a hole in it. I got a replacement one of those too. Yeah, I think it's a good time we're doing this replacement. I don't know if that'll show up, but it looks like part of the spring retainer actually broke off of that also, so we'll see what's available for that. So the rest of the valve cover, cam cover, is held on with a bunch of, looks like T30 bolts, and there's some here in the end, so let's get them out. Over here at the cam belt end, there's a couple also. At least that one's on the floor. Well, there's one way back here. There's a couple hose connections back here. One of them is like a factory crimp that you're gonna have to cut off. I've been here before, so it's just a regular hose clamp. And then there's a constant tension clamp right next to it. And those should shove off. Or crumble. there's your valve cover assembly. These bolts are captured, so you're pretty safe with them. This coolant hose runs right on top here. I'll go ahead and get it out of the way. And the hope will be it doesn't ooze out too much coolant. Looking at the bottle, the coolant should be lower than this level. While we're at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pull this fuel pressure or fuel pump out of the way. So I think I need to pull this fitting out and then I can get this hose off. Put 2 bolts back in, just put the pump back on. Let's see if this will come off. Oh yeah. Now that that's out of the way, there should be a series of Torx bolts surrounding this, but also, while I'm here, this should be the vacuum pump, and it appears to be leaking oil also. So I'm going to take the bolts out of it and remove it. These again are T30s. Like a big bolt that holds an adapter on or a wire loom mounting plate. There's a big fat one there. And then that should come out of the way. Looks like it also doubles as a mounting point for this vacuum pump. So that should come out. So I suspect that was leaking also because that O-ring's rock hard. I do have a kit to fix that, so we'll do that when we go back together. So that's going to expose some more bolts. So I'm pretty much going to have to stick my head in here and get all up in the camera's way. So I'm going to clean some of that off so maybe we can find the rest of the bolts. There's a bolt way back here, which you can't get the ratchet in, or my electric ratchet, so it's going to have to be done old school. It's pretty much right here at the parting line of the cam cover. There's one down here at about the 6 o'clock position. Another one you can't really see, but kind of right here at this notch. Essentially right above the coolant flange. A magnet won't even fit in there, so there's that one right above the flange. Thinking that's all of them. Well, obviously this bracket's going to have to come off. That appears to be a 5mm triple square. So it appears as though this metal pipe is just going to irritate me, so let me figure out how it's going to come off here, and then we'll try to work on this. So let me figure out how this is going to come off. It looks like it's just attached to this heat shield back here, so we should be able to get it off. So there's one bolt hiding all the way up under this corner, which you really couldn't see because all the oil grease, dirt, etc. So now it's loose. It should slide off. We'll have to bend this coolant pipe up and out of the way. Matter of fact, looks like another triple square. Six, we'll get that out of the way. Not sure how much that's going to help. And there it is. Damn. All right, so this piece, sure if you can see that, was in the bottom of the cover. That might actually be part of my high pressure fuel pump. So I have a sneaking suspicion that piece belongs right there. Probably when I took that cam follower out, that fell out. I thought I heard something. So we're gonna have to deal with that. Let's just bring you in here and see what's going on. So that's the gasket. That is actually the cam chain tensioner. So that is worn all the way through, and that plastic piece is falling completely off. So the cam has been tensioned by the actual piston in the tensioner. Wow. So that's not good. Be interesting. Well, and those are probably some of the pieces. Well, we'll get this apart and see what's happening. So next up, I believe, obviously we have to take this off, but in order to do that, there's a tool that will bolt here down between these grooves in the cam. So you need to take a wheel off to be able to turn the engine over to top dead center to get that tool installed. I got this peeled out of the way. I used a 19mm 12-point socket to turn the engine over to what should be top dead center. There's a DT mark right here and a line. And what that should do is that should line up these little lobes in the cam to take this special cam locking tool, which I purchased just for this job. So this comes with a couple, they look like M6 bolts. And that should drop down between these lobes and little indentations on the cam. So there are little rounds on the cams, and this should drop in there. It came with a few bolts. Those are hex bolts, probably 5 or 6. So let me go ahead and tighten those down. We have the camshaft lock in place. I believe everything's set up right, correctly. There's a mark, there's a dot right here on this sprocket. And then apparently on the sprocket behind this cam adjuster is a tooth with a line on it. So first things first, we need to see if we can get this bolt out of here. So the bolt that's in here that holds this on is a Ribe sprocket. Ribe, or a poly drive, is another word for it, I guess. So I guess it's just another term for like a square Torx. Don't try to use a Torx, because on this the teeth are more square, Torx is more rounded. I guess you'll screw it up. So anyway, this is apparently torqued to 1,000,000 foot-pounds. So you need to be careful you don't strip that out. Now some people hammer that in, but that fits pretty tight in there. So we're going to give her a shot with my 1/2-inch drive ratchet here. See what happens. Boy, she's tight. We'll switch to the breaker bar. Make sure that remains tight in there. Give her another pull. Taking the handle from my floor jack to give it a little more leverage. So hopefully we don't break the cam tool. So let me get a little more leverage. I'm going to hold it down here so it doesn't want to twist out. Either that broke the bit or it broke loose. Now the bit appears to be there. Let's see. It may have blown out part of the actual bolt. So it appears that the bit survived just fine, and I can't really see it. So we'll get you guys down in there and you can tell me if it looks like it blew out part of the bolt, which I'm going to guess it did. All right, so since this has turned into a shit show, I'm going to go to option 2. As I said, the bit appears to be fine. And it didn't really appear to round off the bolt. It just broke some pieces off. So let me see if that crap's magnetic. And I can get at least the pieces of the bolt out of there. Because there's oil passages in there that this solenoid or spool works back and forth. And that's what adjusts that adjuster for the variable valve timing. And so you don't want little pieces of metal and garbage down in those holes. So before we go any further, let me make a little sleeve here. Maybe we can protect those holes. Of course, it's all oily, so it's not going to stick, but hopefully it'll stay in there. So we're going to start out with option 1. I have a T55 bit. So we're going to try smashing that baby in there. Which actually fits pretty tight. So I read one post on the internet that you may be able to get it out with impact. So we'll give that a shot. We got the big boy here. We'll go ahead and give him a little extra boost. Here goes. Well, it didn't appear to strip it anymore, so we're not any worse off. The good news is I have a new bolt, so it's apparently a one-time use bolt. So we'll give the old breaker bar shot again. Maybe that impact helped it or drove that Torx in there a little deeper. Ugh. So if that wasn't rounded before, I'm sure it certainly is now. So the next option is a good old drill bit. I read somewhere or saw somewhere you could use a 12 millimeter. Of course, I don't have metric drill bits. So this is a 29/64. The next size up, 15/32. It looks a little chewed up, so we're going to start with this one. So the problem with this bolt being so tight is not necessarily the threads, but is all this surface area where it's tapered, where it goes into that cam adjuster. So theoretically, you can drill into that, and hopefully this outer part will pop loose. You get to a point where it'll break off. But I've also seen where you can just drill it deeper and then pound the Torx in further and get it to come out. So let's start drilling. The bit's kind of garbage, so we'll give it a little bit of help. That's a hard bolt. So it looks like I completely missed the money shot. I don't know if the battery in the camera died or what happened, but I used this drill bit, which happens to be a brand new 29/64, and drilled into the head, and then I got a pry bar behind the Variator and just wiggled it, and it started to move, and it pretty much popped off. Then this came out, the Variator came off. Well, actually this stayed in the Variator, and I was able to just pick it out of there. Took the Variator off. Then what was left of the bolt, I was able to unscrew it by hand. So there you go. Test fit everything back on with my old chain, just to kind of figure out the timing marks lining up. I think I have that nailed. So I think we're finally ready to go back together. I have the new chain tensioner here, all together, nothing busted out of it. And also have new bolts for it. Mostly new bolts anyway. Found it. These bolts torque to 7 foot-pounds or so. And in this case, it's going to be 84 inch-pounds. I'm not sure how critical this really is. As long as they're tight, it's probably fine. Looks like they have Loctite on them. So for that process, we'll come over to the brown board. So the method I've seen online, and I've tested this. So you have a brass link. You're going to want to count the pins around. They say chain links, but really you're counting the pins between 18 and 19. So you start after the link, going clockwise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So these are your magic pins here, the 18 and 19, because black would show up. So you want to roll it over to this side. We can probably mark these in black at this point because this one's not so dirty. So there's our 18 and 19. Roll it over here. We'll mark these pins. Over here on the Variator, if it'll show up, there's a line. We'll go ahead and mark that. Put a mark up here too, just for fun. So we want our Variator mark to go between the 18th and 19th link. And then when we put it on the car, there's a pin right here that goes in a keyway on the exhaust cam. And they only put one brass or different colored link over here on the front, so we'll need that to line up with the front mark on the intake cam. I've made a mark here. There's a dot on the intake cam. I put some silver Sharpie on that. So theoretically, you kind of wrap this chain around here, get your brass link on this front mark, and this dot or Sharpie mark I made on the front cam, which would be the intake cam, and without kind of unrolling your variator from the exhaust cam, make sure our marks are still lined up, which they are. So this pin's kind of pretty far in the back. So again, brass link over this dot, engage it on the front sprocket. So what ideally we want is this pin should drop into that keyway. The exhaust cam is held by the timing belt, so it's not really going to move. The intake cam on the front, I have vice grips on it. It will actually spring back a little bit, and this should drop in. At least the hope is it will drop into that slot on the exhaust cam, which we should be pretty close. I tested this with the old chain and without what was left of my tensioner installed. So I turned that just a little bit and it dropped on. Of course, that was almost too easy, so I'm going to recheck my marks. 18 and 19 are between the mark. Brass link on the line on the front, or the dot. My teeth engaged. A little turn and it drops right in there. I purchased a new bolt from Hell. It's apparently a one-time use bolt, especially if you need to drill it out. So we'll get that started in there. Back to the brown board. So we're going to torque that to 15 foot-pounds plus 45 degrees. Apparently 15 foot-pounds equals 20 newton meters. I already have my torque wrench set for 15 pound-feet. A little leery of this bolt. That is not a lot. So now I need to go 45 degrees to torque to yield this thing. So actually, I'm going to click down one time. So from about where I am right here to about straight up should be 45 degrees. Thinking I'm there. I'm going to actually turn the engine back a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and pull these vice grips off. But we should be good. Plus, that bolt's going to self-tighten. All right, so at this point, I should be able to pull that pin, which nothing really happened. I feel like when I torqued that, it turned back a little bit, so I'll put the ratchet over here on the crank pulley. Just turn that forward a little bit. I've seen stories of the cheap ones breaking and people welding them, so I got a little higher end one. I think based on how much of a hassle that variator was, or that bolt, probably worth the extra few dollars. So now I can put this away in a drawer and probably never use it again. A little turn there and our slack's out. And our chain is as tension as it's going to get until it gets oil pressure in there. All right, so next up, We should be good to go on all that. We need to get the gasket and clean this up a little bit and get this gasket put back on. Should be able to wipe all this off. There are plastic O-rings that go on this valve right here that actually work the variator. I've seen people replace them. I've seen people not. They're pretty expensive, so in this case we're gonna choose not to. So here's the gasket. It's just a metal crushed gasket. It's only going one way. Looks like that's the way she's gonna go. I think before I go all the way with that, I have some assembly lube. I'm gonna put a little bit on this cam lobe for the high pressure fuel pump. Since we saw the condition of that follower when we took it off, we'll lube this bad boy up a little bit. Don't know if it'll help anything, but it shouldn't hurt. Looks as though all these bolts go to that magical 7 foot-pounds. The vacuum pump lives here at the end of this intake camshaft. So this is apparently a source of a major oil leak on all these cars. And I believe it's probably a pretty good source of my oil leak. So here's said vacuum pump. So yeah, it's pretty slimy. So before we put it back on, I think we'll go ahead and rebuild it, which really means put some new O-rings in it. I have this RKX Tech kit, which should do what we need to do. Might actually have some extra parts. So first of all, I'm going to go take some brake cleaner and get some of this nasty oily mess off of it, and then we'll start by taking it. That's a little less slimy than it was. Anyway, this is probably the major source of the oil leak, is this O-ring right here. So it's pretty much rock solid. There we go. So that's pretty hard and flat. T25 appears to be the magic size. So this vacuum pump just kind of swirls this lobe around and gets oil everywhere. So let me get the oil out of here. So there's essentially an O-ring on this cover, which is way more pliable. That's probably not the source of our leak. Apparently these kits have several model years in them, so you pretty much just need to pick what fits your application. So it looks like this brown one's going to fit that. There's really nothing else to this. So that cover can go back on. It should only go one way. I'd say that one. And over here at this side, looks like this one right here is going to do what we need. Like everything else in this vicinity, it's 10 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds. And just when you think it's safe to go back in the water, this plastic fitting right here has 2 little screwdriver grooves. You pretty much have to do simultaneously. You can push in on those little tabs and it should pop this plastic fitting out. And that is where the other O-ring, looks like that's where it lives. So let's see if it'll come off. And when it's extra pliable. And it looks like that's where the check valve lives for the vacuum pump. So, and as oily as that one was and pliable, it's probably not super important you replace it. I would say as tight as that fits now, that O-ring was probably pretty compromised also. The drive for this vacuum pump just needs to line up with this slot in the cam. And it should drop right in. And there it goes. And we're back to the land of T30s and 7 foot-pounds. And this one with a large head. And also attaches this bracket down here that holds this wire loom. Vacuum pump's on, now we're down to the fuel pump. So you may remember when I took this apart, there's a lifter in there that activates the fuel pump. It had a hole rubbed in it, so I purchased a new one. Well, I did anyway, just because they recommend you replace this. So I have the new lifter, or follower. Go ahead and slam a little assembly lube on that, because it can't hurt, right? Put a little bit there on the outside too, for startup purposes. That should just drop in. So you may have remembered, I thought initially just retainer broke, but the end of the entire pump came off. So there's options for new pumps. This one is actually a Hitachi brand. So I went ahead and purchased a new Hitachi fuel pump. So the prices for these are all over the place. You can get a Chinese one on the Jungle Place for like less than $100. I'm normally pretty risky at stuff like that, but in this case, I wanted to go with an OEM type. So OEM type is anywhere from $400 to $700. So I actually found OEM Hitachi made in Germany from Deutsche Auto Parts out of the Charlotte area. And that was $234, or somewhere in that vicinity. So I felt like that was worth the money. And you can see where compared to what came out, that the end of the pump actually broke off on the old one. So it comes with most of this stuff. I did have to put the Schrader valve fitting back in. You have to reuse that. So that'll go back in. Of course, we have to leave it out for that bolt. So I'm going to have to go ahead and pretty much start these fittings as I put it in. Definitely the hose clamp one. So apparently these are one-time use bolts, so I went ahead and purchased new ones. Maybe we're going this far, buying a whole new pump, and they're cheap enough. Go with the same 7 foot-pound torque. And then we're back to the installation is the same as removal. So one choice I did make also is, you may remember here at the vacuum pump, this was all jacked up, split. So the vacuum pump apparently, I don't know if it provides additional vacuum to the brake booster, but it's all about the brake booster, so it all heads there. So I also went ahead and bought a brake booster hose, a new one, so that'll replace all this where it's not split down to this piece under here. This is, I'm assuming, a fuel pressure sensor, some sort of sensor. Will need to come out of the old one into the new one. And it just has an O-ring seal on it. And that is a 24 millimeter. Next up's the valve cover, cam cover, whatever. I went ahead and purchased a new gasket for this. I've replaced this thing once because it was leaking like crazy and it was rock hard. And this isn't the most supple thing you've ever seen either, so. This one happens to be a Victor Reinz, so at least it's sort of OEM quality. And it is way softer than what I just took out. These bolts are captured. Apparently they're only captured in the gasket because half of them fell out. So you'll need to work them back around in the gasket. So while we're at it, might as well replace the gasket under this PCV valve. These are T25s, I think. T25s. Again, they're the T25 wood screw. I'm not sure why VW went and did that, but anyway, this is apparently a common failure problem too. But I don't believe our oil consumption is any worse than it's ever been, so we're going to send this one back on. But based on how all our other gaskets were in here, we'll go ahead and replace this one. And that one's pretty rock hard. It's also a DUS original. Again, there's probably a Torx spec for that, but tighten up's probably okay in this instance. So this is going to have to probably go in these hoses here at the back first, especially this big one. I'm back in the land of T30s. There's a sequence for these. Don't know what it is offhand, but pretty much like a cylinder head. You start in the middle, kind of work your way out. And it should be the same 7 foot-pounds or 10 Newton meters, depending on your choice of units. So this engine cover sits on some plastic pegs, and it has these rubber grommets that fit down in there that snap it on the pegs. These are all gooey and nasty and broken, so I did find some new ones. So I'll go ahead and try to get those back in there. So maybe it'll be way easier to get this engine cover off in the future, instead of gripping on it and hope you don't break a big piece of plastic off in your hand. Might be able to see how much is blown up just from years of grease and heat, etc. Unfortunately, we can't really run it without this thing on here because of the airflow meter. But we don't need to snap it down all the way. We can at least hook that up, hook the air connection up, hook the electrical connection up to it. Come back later and put all this back together, put the battery cover on, but at least we can see if we have any leaks or fuel shooting out somewhere, the fuel pump. So I think we're all back together. Make sure we don't have a cord and a belt. We're back together enough. We should either start or bend some valves or figure out what we forgot to hook up. Probably gonna clatter a little. So I'd say we're definitely misfiring a little bit. Let me check on that. So I rechecked all my connections and restarted it, and now it's running fine. And I don't know if you can hear it. It's way quieter in there now that there's actually something tensioning that chain and the end of the fuel pump's not torn off. So anyway, we'll get all this buttoned back up. We'll let it heat up too, because I've never really cycled it since I did the oil filter housing. But anyway, so if you have one of these Mark V GTIs with the FSI engine, and you haven't looked at your cam follower and high pressure fuel pump, cam chain, all that stuff down here, you might want to go ahead and do that. Ironically, the VW dealer sent me a note saying it's ready for our 210,000 mile service. Wonder how they knew. Anyway, I would not recommend letting yours go this long before checking all that out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.